There are 15 bodies hanging from the trees, and my daughter found every single one of them. I'm Sarah Carter, and I need you to understand something. When they told me what Emily saw that morning, my first thought wasn't horror. It was denial. Because in a town like Millbrook Falls, where the most exciting thing that happens is the annual Harvest Festival, you don't expect your 8-year-old to stumble onto a mass execution site while following the sound of a crying dog. But she did. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day. The kind of winter morning where the cold bites through your skin and the snow reflects sunlight so bright it burns your eyes. Emily had been playing in our backyard, building what she called a snow hospital for injured pine cones, when she heard it, a whimpering, high-pitched and desperate, echoing through the tree line that borders our property. She told me later, in that small, hollow voice that still makes my chest ache, "Mommy, I thought it was hurt. I thought I could save it." Pause. She couldn't. Because when Emily pushed through those frost-covered branches into the dense forest, she didn't find a wounded puppy. She found 15 German shepherds suspended from the trees like grotesque ornaments, their bodies stiff in the sub-zero temperature, arranged in a pattern that made no sense until it made all times the sense in the world. But here's what kept me up that first night, what still haunts me now. The dogs weren't random, they weren't strays or stolen pets. Every single one of them was wearing a collar. Faded, weathered, but unmistakable. Service collars. The kind trained working dogs wear. The kind that belongs to professionals. Someone had taken 15 elite working dogs, healthy, trained, expensive times animals, and systematically eliminated them in the middle of nowhere, 2 miles from the nearest road. And my daughter, my sweet, observant Emily who cries when she sees dead worms on the sidewalk, had found them first. The question everyone was asking, who would do this? But I was asking something different. What were they trying to hide? Emily stopped talking for 3 days. Not completely, she'd respond to direct questions with nods or single words, but the bright, chattering girl who narrated every thought in her head just vanished. She'd sit at the kitchen table pushing cereal around her bowl, staring at nothing, occasionally whispering something I couldn't quite hear. On the 4th day, I finally caught what she was saying. They were guarding it. I looked up from my coffee. "What, baby?" Her eyes, those big hazel eyes that used to sparkle with curiosity, were flat, distant. The dogs, they weren't hanging there because someone was mean to them. They were guarding something, and someone killed them, so they couldn't protect it anymore. Subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and get ready. This story could be yours. The child psychologist we'd rushed her to Dr. Patricia Chen, recommended by 3 different pediatricians, had warned me about this. Trauma rationalization. The brain's way of creating meaning where there's only chaos, especially in children. Emily was trying to give those dogs a purpose, a heroic narrative, because the alternative senseless cruelty was too much for her 8-year-old mind to process. At least, that's what I told myself. But Emily kept drawing the same thing over and over. The pattern, the way the dogs were positioned. From above, if you looked down, they formed something. She couldn't articulate what, but her drawings showed circles within circles, precise spacing, almost geometric. "Honey," I'd said gently, "it was probably just random. Bad people don't always have reasons." "It wasn't random, Mommy." Her voice was steady. Certain. I counted the steps between them. 15 steps. Every time. 15. Deep breath. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that trauma plays tricks on memory, that her brain was inventing order in chaos. But I'd seen the crime scene photos the police showed me, the ones they thought I couldn't handle, but showed me anyway, because I demanded to know what my daughter had witnessed. Emily was right. The spacing was exact. Our town, Millbrook Falls, isn't the kind of place where mysteries happen. Population 3,400. 1 main street, 2 churches, a diner that serves breakfast all day and closes at 7 p.m. People here know each other's business before you know it yourself. We'd moved here 5 years ago precisely because nothing ever happened after Emily's father died in a construction accident in Chicago. I needed quiet, safety, predictability. The woods behind our property were part of that safety. Public forest land, mostly pine and birch. Used by hunters in fall and cross-country skiers in winter. I'd walked those trails dozens of times. I'd never seen anything suspicious. But then again, I'd never gone 2 miles deep into the densest part, where the tree canopy blocks out the sky and the snow lies undisturbed for months. That's where Emily had found them, and that's where everything started to unravel. Detective Mark Holloway arrived on day 6. He wasn't local state police, brought in because our town's 3-person department was overwhelmed by the scope of the investigation. That's what Sheriff Alan Briggs told the local paper, anyway. But I saw the way Briggs looked when Holloway walked into the sheriff's office, and it wasn't relief. It was fear. Holloway was maybe 50, lean and weathered like someone who'd spent too many years looking at things most people turn away from. Salt and pepper hair, tired eyes, and a handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds before he pulled out a notebook. "Mrs. Carter, I need to ask your daughter some questions. She's 8 years old and traumatized," I said flatly. Dr. Chen said. I know what Dr. Chen said. I read her report. He glanced toward our living room, where Emily was building a tower out of blocks with frightening precision, exactly 15 blocks per level. "But your daughter is the only witness we have, and right now, this case makes no sense." I crossed my arms. "Then make it make sense without interrogating my child." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. He sat down at my kitchen table uninvited. 15 German Shepherds, he said quietly. All healthy, recently groomed, no signs of abuse or neglect. Several had old training scars, bite work, obstacle courses. We ran their microchips. You want to know what we found? Pause. I did. I absolutely did. But I also didn't, because you don't get called in from state police for stray dogs. They're ghosts, Holloway continued. No registrations match. Chip numbers that don't exist in any database. It's like these dogs were never officially times-born asterisk. But the chips themselves? Military grade. The kind used in classified K-9 programs. My mouth went dry. Classified. Off-books operations. Training programs that don't officially exist. He leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, those dogs were professionals. And someone went through a lot of effort to erase their history before dumping them in your backyard woods. Why? The word came out as a whisper. That's what I need to figure out. But I think your daughter saw something else out there. Something she hasn't told us yet. I wanted to throw him out. I wanted to scream that Emily had seen times enough asterisk. But instead, I heard myself say, she thinks they were protecting something. Holloway went very still. What? She keeps saying the dogs were guarding something, that they died protecting it. He stared at me for a long moment, then wrote something in his notebook. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. Mrs. Carter, has your daughter ever been to those woods before the day she found the dogs? No, never. I don't let her go past the tree line. But she knew exactly where to find them. It wasn't a question. And the truth of it hit me like ice water. Emily had walked 2 miles through dense forest, in a straight line, directly to that specific location. No wandering, no getting lost. Like she'd been following a map. But that's not even the crazy part. The autopsy reports came back 3 days later, and that's when things stopped making sense entirely. Dr. Lena Weiss, a veterinary forensics expert brought in from the state university, stood in Sheriff Briggs's cramped office and delivered news that made everyone go quiet. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Holloway had started including me in briefings after Emily drew a map that matched geological survey records of the forest from 1987. A map she'd never seen. These dogs weren't killed recently, Dr. Weiss said, spreading glossy photographs across the desk. Time of death was approximately 12 to 15 days before discovery. But that's not the interesting part. Sheriff Briggs shifted uncomfortably. What is? They were euthanized. Professionally. Single injection to each, pentobarbital sodium. Exactly the method used in veterinary settings. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. No pain. No struggle. She pointed to close-ups of the dog's eyes. And they were sedated first. They trusted whoever did this. So we're looking for a veterinarian, one of Briggs's deputies asked. Or someone with military K-9 training, Holloway said quietly. Someone these dogs recognized as authority. Briggs's jaw tightened. That's a hell of an accusation, detective. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. Holloway turned to Dr. Weiss. What about the arrangement? The way they were displayed? Doctor. Weiss hesitated, and I saw something in her expression I didn't like. That's harder to explain. The positioning was precise, almost ritualistic. But when I mapped their locations using GPS coordinates, something emerged. She pulled out her laptop, clicked open a file, and rotated the screen toward us. The pattern Emily had been drawing for days stared back at me from a satellite image overlay. Concentric circles. The dogs positioned like points on a compass. And in the center, where nothing should be, the ground showed evidence of excavation, recent excavation that had been carefully concealed with snow and forest debris. Someone dug something up, Dr. Weiss said, or buried something new. Within the last month, the room fell silent. Finally, Holloway spoke. Sheriff Briggs, I need access to any records this town has about that forest. Property deeds, logging permits, hunting licenses, everything. That forest is public land, Briggs said stiffly. Has been for 40 years. But it wasn't always. I already checked. Prior to 1984, that section was private property, leased to Holloway. Glanced at his notes. Meridian Solutions Group. Ring any bells? Briggs's face went pale. Should it? I asked. No one answered me. That night, Emily woke up screaming. I ran to her room, found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, gasping like she'd been drowning. Baby. What? The man with the sad eyes, she sobbed. He's crying, Mommy. He's crying because he had to say goodbye. I held her tight, stroking her hair. It was just a nightmare, sweetheart. No, she pulled back, looked at me with eerie certainty. He loved them, all of them, and he's so sorry. Pause. The next morning, Holloway called. They'd found the first body. Not a dog's body. A human one. 3 feet below where the center of Emily's circle would have been, buried in frozen earth that had been recently disturbed and carefully camouflaged. Forensics uncovered skeletal remains wrapped in military-grade polymer sheeting. Male. Approximately 45 to 60 years old at time of death. Cause of death. Single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Time of death. Approximately 23 years ago. The forest had been keeping secrets for longer than I'd been alive. Holloway showed up at my house that afternoon, and this time I didn't try to keep him away from Emily. Something had shifted. This wasn't about protecting my daughter from questions anymore. This was about understanding why a dead man and 15 executed dogs were connected to whatever my daughter had tapped into that morning in the woods. Emily, Holloway said gently, sitting across from her at our kitchen table. I need you to tell me about the man with sad eyes. She looked at me. I nodded. He comes at night, Emily said softly. In my dreams. But it doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like a memory that isn't mine. What does he look like? Old, gray hair. He wears a green coat with patches on the shoulders. And he's always crying. He keeps saying, I'm sorry, boys. I'm so sorry. Over and over. My skin prickled. Boys? The dogs. He calls them his boys. Emily's voice cracked. He loved them so much. He trained them and took care of them, and they trusted him completely. And then one day, men in suits told him he had to. He had to. She couldn't finish. But we all knew. Holloway's expression was grim. Emily, does he say anything else? Any names? Any places? He says, she closed her eyes, concentrating. He says, they made me erase the evidence. They made me erase everything. And then he says a word I don't understand. Meridian. The name hung in the air like a curse. Holloway and I locked eyes. He stood abruptly. I need to make some calls. Wait, I said. What the hell is Meridian? He paused at the door, turned back. 25 years ago, Meridian Solutions Group was a private military contractor that trained specialized K-9 units for off-books operations. Officially, they shut down in 1998 after a federal audit found accounting irregularities. Unofficially, pause. Unofficially, they were disappeared because they knew too much about operations nobody wanted on record. Interrogations. Renditions. Things that would make international news if anyone asked the right questions. And Sheriff Briggs? Holloway's jaw tightened. He was a deputy back then, very close to the department that oversaw the contract with Meridian. The implications settled over me like frost. You're saying our sheriff helped cover up whatever happened here. I'm saying someone did. And those dogs were the last remaining evidence of operations that powerful people want to stay buried. He looked at Emily with something close to awe. Your daughter didn't just stumble onto a crime scene. She found the moment someone's conscience finally broke. After he left, I sat with Emily in silence, watching her draw another picture. This time, it wasn't the pattern of the dogs. It was a man in a green coat, standing in the center of 15 German shepherds, his hand raised in salute. Beneath it, in her careful child's handwriting, he said goodbye the only way he could. And that's when I understood. Whoever killed those dogs wasn't a monster. He was the one who'd been forced to clean up after monsters. And 23 years later, he'd chosen confession over silence. The man in the grave was identified 4 days later. Robert Bobby McKenzie. Former Army Ranger, specialized K-9 handler. Employed by Meridian Solutions Group from 1995 to 1998. Reported missing in December 1998. Case went cold within 6 months. No suspects, no leads, no body. Until now. But here's what made my blood run cold. The ballistics report on the bullet retrieved from his skull matched a service weapon registered to the Millbrook Falls Sheriff's Department. A weapon that had been reported stolen in January 1999. Sheriff Briggs called a town meeting. I'll never forget, walking into that packed high school gymnasium, seemed like every resident of Millbrook Falls had shown up, faces tight with fear and confusion. Reporters from 3 counties had descended on our quiet town, and suddenly our annual Harvest Festival was less interesting than the growing scandal of buried bodies and executed dogs in the forest. Briggs stood at a podium, looking 20 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. I know there's been a lot of speculation, he began, voice carefully controlled. I want to assure everyone that we're cooperating fully with state investigators, and, why didn't you tell us Meridian operated here? Someone shouted from the crowd. That was classified. For 25 years? The room erupted. Accusations flew. Briggs tried to maintain order, but you could see him crumbling. The careful facade he'd maintained for decades, finally cracking under pressure. Holloway stood in the back, watching, waiting. After 30 minutes of chaos, Briggs finally admitted it. Yes. Meridian had a contract with this county from 1995 to 1998. They used the forest for K-9 training exercises. The program was shut down, and we were instructed to never speak of it. Those were our orders. Orders from who? I called out, surprising myself. Briggs looked directly at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. Federal level. Names I'm not authorized to share. But I want to be clear about one thing. I didn't know about Bobby McKenzie's death. I didn't know he was buried out there. And I sure as hell didn't know what was done with those dogs. But you suspected, Holloway said, stepping forward. Didn't you, Sheriff? The gymnasium went dead silent. Briggs's shoulders sagged. Bobby came to me a month before he disappeared. Said he'd been ordered to eliminate evidence of certain training operations, dogs that had been used in exercises the government wanted erased. He was devastated. These were his animals, his partners. He told me he couldn't do it, that he was going to report everything to federal authorities. And then he vanished, Holloway finished. I thought he'd run, gone AWOL. When they found his car abandoned at the Canadian border, everyone assumed. Briggs's voice broke. I didn't ask questions I should have asked. I told myself it wasn't my jurisdiction. I was a coward. The word hung in the air, raw and honest. Someone in the crowd started crying. Then another. The weight of decades-old complicity of a town that had chosen comfort over curiosity settled over all of us. That night, Emily had another dream. This time, Bobby McKenzie wasn't crying. He was showing her where the evidence was hidden. Emily woke me at 2 a.m., clutching her sketchbook. Mommy, we have to go back to the forest. Every maternal instinct I had screamed no. Absolutely not. No way in hell was I taking my traumatized daughter back to the place that had shattered her innocence. But then she showed me what she'd drawn. A building, half buried, concealed by 25 years of forest growth. Coordinates written in numbers she couldn't possibly know. He wants us to find it, Emily whispered. The training facility. That's where the records are. That's where they kept everything. I called Holloway. By dawn, we had a search team assembled. Holloway, Dr. Weiss, 2 state forensics techs, and to everyone's surprise, Sheriff Briggs, who'd volunteered without being asked. Emily stayed with Dr. Chen. I wasn't taking any chances. The coordinates led us 3 miles deeper into the forest, to a section so overgrown I would have walked right past it without a second glance. But ground-penetrating radar revealed what our eyes couldn't: concrete foundations buried beneath decades of accumulated earth and vegetation. "There's a structure here," one tech confirmed. "Maybe 20 by 30 feet, partially collapsed, but intact enough to enter if we dig." It took 6 hours of careful excavation. What we found made national news within 24 hours. The Meridian Training Facility was more than just a building. It was a bunker, climate-controlled, reinforced, designed to withstand scrutiny and time. And inside, preserved in waterproof containers, was everything Bobby McKenzie couldn't bring himself to destroy. Training logs, video footage, financial records, names, evidence of a K-9 program that had trained dogs for enhanced interrogation support, a sanitized phrase for animals taught to terrorize detainees in black site prisons overseas. Operations that violated every international treaty on humane treatment. Dogs that had been witnesses to war crimes, complicit through no choice of their own. And when the program was shut down to avoid scandal, someone had ordered all evidence eliminated, including the dogs, including Bobby McKenzie, when he'd refused. Dr. Weiss found Bobby's final report in a sealed envelope, dated 3 days before his death. I read it with shaking hands. I cannot do what they've asked. These animals served with honor. They followed every command, trusted completely. And now they want me to euthanize all 15 because they're security risks. These dogs didn't choose this work. They deserve better than to be erased like mistakes. I've documented everything. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this. I hope they understand that some orders shouldn't be followed, no matter the cost. If they kill me, I want one thing. Bury me with my boys, let us rest together. We were a team until the end. Deep breath. The letter was addressed to no one and everyone. A confession, a plea, a final act of defiance. 23 years later, someone had honored his wish. Someone had brought those 15 dogs back to the forest, arranged them in formation around Bobby's grave, a honor guard for a man who'd chosen conscience over compliance, and given them the peaceful death he'd wished he could have provided. Someone who'd carried that guilt for over 2 decades and finally found the courage to make it right. But who? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Weiss was reviewing the veterinary injection sites on the dogs when she noticed something. The technique was flawless, military precise. Each injection placed in the exact location, taught in advanced K-9 handler training. Whoever did this learned from the same program Bobby did, she said. Same training, same protocols, same approach. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone who understood these dogs on a fundamental level. Holloway pulled training records from the recovered files. Meridian had employed 6 K-9 handlers during its operation. Bobby McKenzie was the senior handler. The other 5 had scattered after the program ended. 3 went to private security firms overseas. 1 died in a car accident in 2003. And one had stayed local. Alan Briggs. Before he became sheriff, he'd been a K-9 deputy. Before that, supplemental income, working part-time for Meridian, assisting with training exercises. He'd known Bobby McKenzie personally. He'd known those dogs. We found him at the forest edge, standing where Emily had first entered the woods, staring at the tree line like a man at confession. "How long have you known?" Holloway asked quietly. Briggs didn't turn around. "That Bobby was buried out there? I suspected for years, but I didn't know for certain until last year, when I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The words hit like a physical blow. "Doctor gave me 12 to 18 months. That was 14 months ago." He finally looked at us, and his eyes were the same sad eyes Emily had described in her dreams. "Funny thing about dying makes you reconsider what secrets are worth taking to your grave." "You killed him," I said, my voice shaking. "No." The word was firm, certain. "But I know who did. And I helped cover it up." "That's almost worse, isn't it?" "Bobby came to me for help, and I told him to drop it, to follow orders, to just," he swallowed hard, "to just kill those dogs and move on with his life. Instead, someone killed him," Holloway said. "Federal contractors, cleaned up loose ends before the whole program could unravel. Made it look like he'd gone AWOL. The department was told to close the case, classify everything, never mention Meridian again. Briggs's hands trembled. I've lived with that for 23 years, watched his family grieve, watched this town forget, convinced myself I'd done the right thing for everyone's safety. But you didn't, I whispered. No, I didn't. He looked at me directly. When I knew I was dying, I made a decision. Bobby deserved better. Those dogs deserved better. So, I found them. My breath caught. You found the dogs? Took me 8 months. They'd been scattered, some sold to private contractors, some euthanized quietly years ago. Some just disappeared into the system. But I tracked down everyone I could. 15 dogs, or their descendants trained in the same program. I brought them here, gave them the peace Bobby wanted to give them, and arranged them the way he'd taught me. You killed them, Doctor. Weiss breathed. I set them free, Briggs corrected quietly, from a legacy they never asked for, and I gave Bobby his honor guard. Pause. Then I waited. Because I knew someone would find them eventually. I knew the truth would come out. His voice cracked. I didn't think it would be a little girl. Emily's innocent discovery hadn't been random chance. It had been an old man's dying confession, orchestrated with precision and hope that someone would care enough to ask why. The legal aftermath was brutal and complicated. Briggs was arrested. But between his terminal diagnosis and the evidence he'd helped uncover, prosecutors struggled to determine what charges made sense. Euthanizing animals that arguably should have been retired anyway? Disturbing a crime scene to expose a decades-old murder? Obstruction of justice for crimes committed by federal contractors who might never face consequences? The story went national, then international. Families of detainees held in black sites during the early 2000s came forward, sharing horrifying accounts that matched the training records we'd found. Human rights organizations demanded investigations. Politicians gave carefully worded statements that said everything and nothing. Meridian Solutions Group, of course, no longer existed. The parent company had dissolved in 2005, absorbed into larger defense contractors, whose lawyers argued that current corporate entities bore no responsibility for past subsidiary actions. The federal officials who'd ordered Bobby McKenzie's silence were retired, protected by classification laws and government immunity. Nobody was going to jail except possibly the dying man who tried to expose it all. Emily testified in a closed hearing, just her, me, a child advocate, and 3 judges. She told them about her dreams, her drawings, the feeling that someone was trying to show her something important. The lead judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen everything, wept openly. This child's trauma led to the exposure of crimes most adults chose to ignore, she said afterward. I don't know if that's justice or tragedy or both. Maybe it was both. The turning point came from an unexpected ally, veterans organizations. When retired K-9 handlers learned what had been done to dogs who'd served in classified operations, the outrage was immediate and fierce. These weren't civilians who could be dismissed as emotional activists. These were military professionals who understood the sacred bond between handlers and their partners. They demanded accountability. They demanded records. They demanded the right to know what had happened to animals who'd served their country, even in operations that never should have existed. Public pressure forced congressional hearings. Bobby McKenzie's name was cleared. His death officially declared a homicide, and a memorial was erected in the forest where he'd been buried. A simple stone marker, surrounded by 15 smaller stones, each bearing the name of a dog whose service would now be remembered. Sheriff Alan Briggs pleaded guilty to unlawful disposal of animal remains and desecration of a crime scene. His sentence: time served and 200 hours of community service, to be completed by speaking to law enforcement agencies about the cost of institutional silence. He died 6 weeks later, peacefully, in hospice care. His last words, according to the nurse, were, "Tell Emily I'm sorry. Enten." But here's the part that broke me. That still breaks me when I think about it. At Briggs's funeral, 15 German shepherds from local K-9 units formed an honor guard. Because even in death, even after everything, the community of handlers understood what he'd been trying to do. He'd been trying to give his friend the farewell they'd both earned. Emily is 10 now. 2 years have passed since that Valentine's Day morning when she followed a sound into the forest and changed everything. The nightmares have faded, replaced by something harder to define, a kind of quiet wisdom that doesn't belong in someone so young. She still draws. But now she draws living dogs, healthy, happy, playing in fields without shadows. Dr. Chen says that's healing. I think it's hope. The town has changed. Millbrook Falls will never be the same place that prided itself on nothing ever happening. We have a memorial now, right on Main Street, dedicated to the courage to question and the strength to speak truth. Tour buses stop sometimes, people taking photos, asking questions about the case that exposed corruption nobody wanted to acknowledge. Some residents resent it. Others have found purpose in it, forming advocacy groups for whistleblower protection, animal rights, government accountability. Me? I'm still just trying to raise my daughter. But Emily did something last spring that made me realize she's going to be okay. She asked if we could volunteer at the local animal shelter. We go every Saturday now. She's amazing with the dogs, patient, gentle, intuitive. She knows exactly how to approach nervous rescues, how to earn trust, how to show them that not all humans bring pain. Last week, she was working with a German Shepherd mix who'd been surrendered by a family that couldn't handle him anymore. The dog was terrified, aggressive, lashing out at everyone who came near. Emily sat on the floor 6 feet away and waited. 3 hours later, the dog was resting his head in her lap. "What did you do?" the shelter director asked, amazed. Emily shrugged. "I just listened. He was scared because nobody ever told him he was safe. Once he knew I understood, he could relax." Pause. On the drive home, I asked her if she still had dreams about the man with sad eyes. "Sometimes," she said, "but now he's smiling. He's with his dogs again. They're running through the forest together, and nobody can hurt them anymore." "You gave him that," I said quietly. "By being brave enough to walk into those woods, by trusting what you felt." She looked at me with those wise, ancient eyes in her young face. "I didn't give him anything, Mommy. He gave times us, times something. He showed us that even when everyone else is silent, one person choosing to speak can change everything. And there it is. The lesson buried in horror and heartbreak and the frozen woods of February. Silence protects the guilty. Questions honor the dead. And sometimes an 8-year-old's courage to follow a sound into darkness is exactly what's needed to bring light. The German Shepherds weren't victims in the end. They were teachers, silent witnesses to crimes they never chose, whose deaths became testimony that couldn't be ignored or erased or buried forever. Bobby McKenzie wasn't a traitor. He was a man who understood that loyalty has limits, that some orders betray the very values they claim to protect. And Sheriff Alan Briggs wasn't a villain. He was a man who spent 23 years choosing comfort over courage, until his own mortality forced him to decide what kind of truth he wanted to leave behind. None of them are heroes exactly. But they're not monsters either. They're human, flawed, and frightened, and trying their best in systems designed to make silence easier than speech. Emily understands that now. Maybe that's the real resolution. Not justice in the legal sense, but understanding in the moral sense. The forest is quiet again. The federal investigations have moved on to other scandals. Life in Millbrook Falls continues, forever changed but somehow still standing. And on February 14th every year, we visit the memorial. We bring 15 flowers, one for each dog, and we stand in silence, honoring the sacrifice of animals who never had a choice and the man who finally gave them peace. Emily always says the same thing. "Thank you for trusting me." I don't know if Bobby McKenzie's spirit hears her. I don't know if any of it is real, or just trauma and coincidence woven into narrative our brains can process. But I know this. My daughter walked into darkness and emerged carrying light. She found bodies and exposed truth. She was 8 years old and braver than any adult in that forest. And if you ask her what she learned from it all, she'll tell you simply, sometimes being brave isn't about being strong. It's about being willing to see what everyone else refuses to look at. It's about trusting that the truth matters, even when it's terrifying. Deep breath. Especially when it's terrifying. The 15 German Shepherds hanging in the frozen forest weren't the end of a story. They were the beginning of a reckoning. And a little girl named Emily Carter was the one brave enough to start it.